close your eyes and let yourself drift, not into sleep just yet, but into another world. A world of salt-sprayed winds, the rhythm of oars cutting through the Mediterranean, the smell of incense and cedarwood wafting from bustling harbors, and the shimmer of bronze under a blazing North African sun. You are entering the story of a people whose name once struck awe and terror across the ancient world. A city whose merchants touched every shore, whose generals nearly bent Rome to its knees, and whose fall remains one of the most haunting tragedies of antiquity. This is the story of Carthage, Rome's greatest rival. But Carthage did not begin as an empire. Its story begins with exiles, with traders, with a voyage across the sea. Long before the name Carthage echoed in Roman ears, there were the Phoenicians, master sailors of the eastern Mediterranean. From the cities of Tyre and Sidon, they spread like the tide, establishing colonies and ports wherever trade beckoned. The Phoenicians carried with them purple dye, carved ivory, glass, and the world's first true alphabet. To the Greeks, they were cunning merchants. To others, mysterious wanderers who worshipped strange gods beneath the open sky. Among these colonies, one would rise above all others. The Greeks called it Carchedon. The Romans would say Carthago. To its own people, it was Carthage, the new city. Picture it now, around the 9th century before Common Era. Legend tells us that a queen founded this city, Elissa, whom the Romans later remembered as Dido. Driven from her homeland in Tyre, fleeing treachery and murder, she crossed the sea with loyal followers and landed on the coast of what is now Tunisia. There, on a narrow peninsula with a safe harbor and fertile hinterland, she struck a bargain with the local tribes. As much land as could be encircled by an ox hide. Cleverly, she cut the hide into thin strips and encircled an entire hill, Byrsa, the citadel that would become Carthage's beating heart. Whether this story is myth or truth, it captures something essential about Carthage. Cunning, practical, unyielding. A city built on wit as much as on stone. By the 7th century before Common Era, Carthage was no longer just another Phoenician outpost. It had become the queen of the Western Mediterranean. Its harbors filled with ships bearing grain from Sicily, silver from Spain, tin from Britain, amber from the Baltic, gold and ivory from Africa's interior. Its markets were alive with every tongue of the known world. Libyans, Numidians, Berbers, Greeks, Iberians, Sardinians, and Gauls. Carthage was not merely a city of merchants. It was an empire of the sea. At its peak, its navy was unrivaled. Sleek war galleys patrolled the waves, their prows sharpened like the beak of a bird of prey, ready to ram enemies into splinters. The Carthaginians jealously guarded their trade routes, keeping outsiders away from their riches with treaties, tariffs, and when needed, brutal force. But Carthage was also more than trade and war. It was a civilization with its own soul. Its gods looked eastward to Phoenicia, yet took root in African soil. Baal Hammon, Lord of the Sky, and Tanit, Celestial Mother, ruled over them. Great fires were lit in their honor, and though dark rumors spread among outsiders about child sacrifices, a topic that still sparks debate today, what mattered to the Carthaginians themselves was devotion, community, and the eternal favor of their deities. Life in Carthage was both cosmopolitan and deeply structured. Wealthy merchant families sat on councils, guiding policy with an almost aristocratic coolness. Generals were elected to lead armies, but were always subject to the oversight of the Senate and the people. Unlike Rome, Carthage did not thirst for land in every direction. It sought security through trade, profit, and the careful weaving of alliances. Yet, as with all great powers, the hunger to dominate grew, and with it came the seeds of rivalry. Beyond Carthage's shining harbors stretched a Mediterranean crowded with ambition. To the north lay the Greeks, restless and inventive. To the west, tribes and islands where Carthage extended its influence. And across the sea, rising slowly but steadily, was another city-state, fierce, disciplined, and expanding: Rome. At first, the two powers coexisted. Carthage even aided Rome against invaders, treating the young republic almost like a minor partner in Mediterranean politics. But as both powers grew, their interests collided: in Sicily, in trade, in pride. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would shape history: the Punic Wars. Yet before we arrive at the clash with Rome, we must linger a little longer in the early centuries of Carthage, when its empire stretched across islands and coasts, when its admirals ruled the seas, and when its citizens believed their city might endure forever. Imagine standing on the ramparts of Bursa Hill, looking out across the harbor. Below you lies the Kophon, a marvel of engineering, an inner, circular dock for the war fleet, and an outer rectangle for merchant ships. Together, they could hold hundreds of vessels, concealed and protected, ready at a moment's notice. The heart of Carthage beat with the sound of hammers repairing hulls, the clatter of traders bargaining, the chants of priests, the laughter of children, and the steady roar of the sea. Carthage was a marvel of its age. But no marvel stands unchallenged. Carthage's empire was not built in silence. It expanded through both opportunity and necessity. For a city dependent on trade, controlling the sea meant survival. To the west lay fertile North Africa, dotted with Libyan tribes and Berber kingdoms. Carthage secured their loyalty, sometimes through treaties, sometimes through tribute, and sometimes through force. To the north stretched the islands of the Mediterranean: Sardinia, Corsica, and especially Sicily, rich in grain and strategic beyond measure. But Sicily was not an empty prize. It was the beating heart of Greek ambition in the west. Cities like Syracuse thrived there, proud outposts of Hellenic culture. For centuries, Carthage and the Greek cities of Sicily waged war and peace in cycles. Battles fought with hoplites and mercenaries. Fleets colliding off rocky coasts. Treaties signed and broken. This long struggle hardened Carthage's armies and tested its generals. Yet it also revealed a central truth about the Carthaginian state: its reliance on mercenaries. Unlike Rome, where every citizen was bound by duty to serve, Carthage's armies were composed largely of hired men. Iberians with their curved swords, Balearic slingers with deadly accuracy, Gauls with wild charges, Libyans disciplined in ranks. Carthaginian citizens rarely fought in large numbers. Instead, the city's wealth allowed it to command the services of others. This created armies of dazzling diversity, but also a hidden fragility. Loyalty bought with coin could falter when fortunes turned. Still, Carthage prospered. Its admirals learned the secrets of distant waters, perhaps even venturing beyond the Pillars of Hercules into the Atlantic. Some ancient sources whisper of Carthaginian voyages that reached as far as Britain's tin mines, and even beyond to unknown shores. Hanno the Navigator, one of their explorers, sailed far down the African coast, encountering great rivers, fiery mountains, and what he described as gorillae, creatures some believe were apes, others think may have been myth. These accounts blur the line between legend and history, but they remind us Carthage was not a city that feared the horizon. It pursued it. Yet, all horizons eventually meet resistance. By the 4th century before Common Era, Carthage found itself drawn again into the affairs of Sicily. There, one Greek tyrant after another rose and fell, and Carthage, with its wealth and fleets, sought to tip the balance in its favor. But the Greeks of Sicily were tenacious, and none more so than the city of Syracuse. Time and again, Carthaginian armies marched into Sicily, and time and again, the walls of Syracuse defied them. Still, Carthage endured. It was wealthy beyond imagining. Its harbors teemed with grain, oil, wine, silver, and gold. Its senators, robed in authority, governed with an oligarch's prudence. It seemed that no power could truly dislodge Carthage from its throne as queen of the western seas. But in the middle of the 3rd century before Common Era, a new player stepped onto the stage. Across the sea, Rome had grown from a modest city-state into a formidable republic. Its legions had subdued Italy. Its discipline was unmatched. And though Rome had no tradition of naval warfare, it possessed something far more dangerous: relentless determination. At first, relations between Carthage and Rome were practical, even cordial. Treaties defined spheres of influence. Carthage respected Rome's dominance in Italy, while Rome acknowledged Carthage's mastery of the seas. Yet in Sicily, their ambitions collided when a dispute erupted in the city of Messana, with mercenaries and rival factions calling for aid. Rome and Carthage both intervened. What began as a local quarrel escalated into a conflict that would last over 2 decades, the First Punic War. Imagine, if you will, the shock this war represented. Carthage had always considered itself unchallenged on the waves. Rome, by contrast, was a land power with little experience at sea. And yet, Rome adapted. Captured Carthaginian ships served as models. Roman craftsmen built fleets at astonishing speed. To overcome Carthage's superior seamanship, Rome devised a deadly innovation, the corvus, a boarding bridge with an iron spike. When Carthaginian ships drew near, the corvus would crash down, fastening the two vessels together, transforming a naval battle into a land battle. Rome's specialty. The results were staggering. Battles that should have gone to Carthage ended in Roman victories. At Mylae, at Ecnomus, and elsewhere, Rome proved that determination could overcome experience. Carthage, though still powerful, began to feel the strain of fighting an enemy that refused to yield. The war dragged on, ruinously expensive, devastating for Sicily, and punishing for both sides. For Carthage, it was a sobering lesson. Rome was no minor power, no partner to be tolerated. It was a rival unlike any other, stubborn, disciplined, and utterly unwilling to compromise. By 241 before Common Era, the First Punic War ended in Rome's favor. Carthage ceded Sicily, paid crushing indemnities, and saw its aura of invincibility shattered. For the first time, Carthage had been humbled. But even in defeat, Carthage remained dangerous. Its navy still existed, its wealth endured, and its people still dreamed of greatness. And as Rome celebrated, few realized that this was only the beginning. For Carthage, the loss of Sicily was not the end. It was a turning point, a moment that would set into motion new ambitions, new conquests, and the rise of a family whose name would echo forever in history, the Barcids. Defeat in the First Punic War left Carthage shaken, but not destroyed. In the aftermath, the city faced not only external humiliation, but also internal crisis. The cost of indemnities demanded by Rome strained Carthage's treasury. Mercenaries who had fought for years without full pay began to mutiny. This was the Truceless War, one of the darkest chapters in Carthaginian history. The mercenaries, joined by discontented Libyan tribes, rose in brutal rebellion. What followed was a nightmare of massacres, betrayals, and unimaginable cruelty. The rebels crucified Carthaginian commanders, slaughtered civilians, and vowed to erase the city itself. Carthage fought back with equal savagery, leaving no act of brutality unanswered. When at last the rebellion was crushed, tens of thousands lay dead. Carthage survived, but scarred. And it was from these scars that new resolve emerged. If Carthage could no longer dominate Sicily, then it would seek new lands to the west. The answer lay across the sea, in Iberia, modern Spain and Portugal. Rich in silver mines, fertile fields, and fierce tribes to be subdued, Iberia offered the wealth and manpower Carthage needed to rebuild its strength. The man chosen to lead this renewal was Hamilcar Barca, a veteran general of the First Punic War. Hamilcar was as brilliant as he was relentless. He understood that Carthage's survival depended on expansion, and that Rome, though victorious, would remain a looming threat. With his family at his side, including his young son, Hannibal, Hamilcar embarked on the great project of forging a new Carthaginian dominion. Picture Iberia in the late 3rd century before Common Era. Rugged mountains, deep forests, rivers rich with fish, and tribes both warlike and proud. To some, Carthage came as conqueror, to others, as partner. Hamilcar used diplomacy and force in equal measure, binding tribes to his cause, subduing others, and extracting tribute from the land. Most crucially, Iberian silver began to flow into Carthage's coffers, replenishing its wealth, funding new armies, and reviving its ambitions. It was during this Iberian campaign that a moment occurred which would echo through history. As the story goes, Hamilcar brought his son Hannibal, then just a boy of 9, before the gods. He bade him swear an oath, a solemn vow that he would never be a friend to Rome, but an enemy until death. The young boy's hand touched the sacred flame, and his destiny was set. Whether embellished or true, this tale captures the spirit of Hannibal Barca, a man raised from childhood to see Rome not as a neighbor, but as an eternal foe. Hamilcar's work in Iberia laid the foundation for Carthage's resurgence. Yet, fate intervened. In battle against a local tribe, he was killed, leaving the project unfinished. Command then passed to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, who continued to expand Carthaginian influence with diplomacy and marriage alliances. Hasdrubal founded the great city of Carthago Nova, New Carthage, a gleaming base of operations on Spain's southeastern coast, rich in harbors and resources. But Hasdrubal, too, would fall, assassinated by a Celtic warrior. Now, command passed to the son of Hamilcar. Still young, but already proven in the field, Hannibal Barca took up his father's mantle. To his men, he was not only a general, but the embodiment of their cause. He was charismatic, bold, and relentless. He lived alongside his soldiers, endured their hardships, shared their victories. His eyes, it was said, burned with a brilliance and intensity that could not be forgotten. Hannibal wasted little time. In Iberia, he subdued tribes, seized fortresses, and pushed Carthaginian power further inland. His campaigns were marked by daring strategy and ruthless precision. And all the while, his gaze turned toward Rome. Rome, meanwhile, watched uneasily. Treaties had been signed to restrain Carthaginian expansion, the most notable being the agreement that Carthage would not cross the river Ebro in Spain. But Hannibal's ambitions tested these boundaries. When he besieged Saguntum, a city allied with Rome, though south of the Ebro, the die was cast. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. Carthage refused. Pride, ambition, and the oath of a boy had converged. War was inevitable. Thus began the Second Punic War, one of the most extraordinary conflicts the ancient world had ever seen. And at its heart was Hannibal Barca, son of Hamilcar, enemy sworn to Rome. But Hannibal's war would not be waged in the way Rome expected. Instead of waiting for Rome to bring the fight to Iberia, Hannibal conceived a plan so audacious that it seemed impossible. he would take the war to Italy itself. Not by sea, where Rome's navy might intercept him, but by land, across the Pyrenees, through hostile Gaul, and over the towering Alps, with an army of men, horses, and even elephants. What followed was a march so legendary that it has never been forgotten. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps was not only a feat of logistics and endurance, but a declaration of intent. Rome would not fight Carthage in distant lands. Rome would fight for its very survival on its own soil. Hannibal's march into legend began in the year 218 before Common Era. His army, hardened by years of Iberian campaigns, set out from New Carthage. Estimates vary, but ancient sources suggest perhaps 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and dozens of war elephants accompanied him. They were a mosaic of peoples. Iberians with their curved falcata swords, Numidian horsemen, swift as the wind, Libyans in bronze armor, and Celtic allies eager for plunder. Crossing the Pyrenees, Hannibal faced hostility not only from tribes, but from the land itself. Rivers had to be forded, supplies carried, spirits kept alive. Still, he pressed on. Through southern Gaul, he fought and bargained his way, until at last he stood before the greatest barrier of all, the Alps. Imagine the scene: towering peaks of ice and stone, snow-capped ridges, narrow passes where a single misstep meant death. The Carthaginians, weary already, now faced the wrath of the mountains. Avalanches swept men and beasts into the abyss. Tribes harried them with ambushes. The cold gnawed at their flesh. And yet, Hannibal urged them forward, his voice carrying over the howling wind, his determination refusing to break. After weeks of torment, Hannibal's battered army descended into Italy. Though reduced in numbers, perhaps only half remained. They emerged like ghosts of doom upon the fertile plains of the Po. Rome, secure in its heartland for centuries, now saw an enemy at its gates. The first clash came swiftly. At the river Trebia, Hannibal lured the Romans into an ambush. His cavalry and hidden troops cut them down, the icy waters swallowing fleeing men. It was a stunning victory, and Rome reeled. But Hannibal was not finished. The following year, in 217 before Common Era, he struck again, this time at Lake Trasimene. There, with careful deception, he drew the Romans into a narrow pass. When the signal was given, his men descended from the hills, trapping the Roman legions between the lake and the mountainside. It was slaughter. Tens of thousands killed or captured, entire cohorts wiped from existence. The Roman consul himself perished in the chaos. Panic swept through Rome. Never before had the Republic suffered such disasters. And yet, Hannibal's genius still had one more masterpiece to unveil. In 216 before Common Era, near the small town of Cannae, Hannibal faced Rome's largest force yet, nearly 80,000 men, massed in a single army. Hannibal commanded far fewer, perhaps half that number. And yet, On that hot August day, he executed a maneuver so perfect it is still studied by generals to this day. He placed his weaker troops in the center, allowing them to bend under the Roman assault, while his stronger flanks held firm. As the Romans pressed forward, they became trapped in a tightening crescent. Then Hannibal's cavalry struck from behind, sealing the encirclement. The Roman army, the pride of the Republic, was surrounded. For hours, the slaughter unfolded. Estimates suggest 50,000 Romans fell. An entire generation of soldiers wiped away in a single battle. Cannae became a word synonymous with utter defeat. Hannibal stood triumphant, his strategy unmatched, his name whispered in terror. Allies across Italy began to waver in their loyalty to Rome. Some defected to Hannibal's side. For a moment, it seemed as though Rome itself might fall. And yet, Rome did not fall. Here lies one of history's greatest paradoxes. Hannibal, having annihilated Rome's armies in battle after battle, never marched directly upon the city itself. Why? The reasons are many. His army, though brilliant, was weary and undersupplied. He lacked the siege equipment needed to storm Rome's massive walls. Carthage, distant and cautious, did not send him the reinforcements he desperately needed. So instead, Hannibal remained in Italy, moving like a shadow, undefeated for over a decade. He sought to break Rome by eroding its alliances, by bleeding it slowly, by waiting for the Republic to collapse under its own weight. But Rome, resilient beyond all expectation, refused to die. The Senate, though battered by grief, adopted a strategy of endurance. They appointed Fabius Maximus, known as the Delayer, who avoided pitched battles with Hannibal, instead harassing his supply lines, refusing him the chance for another Cannae. Though unpopular at first, Fabian tactics proved effective. Hannibal, for all his brilliance, could not strike a killing blow against an enemy that refused to stand still. Years passed. Hannibal marched across Italy, a ghost at Rome's feast, burning, raiding, and fighting, but never conquering. His elephants have long perished in the cold or the heat, but his legend only grew. To Roman children, he became a nightmare made flesh, the monster at the door. Mothers were said to hush their children with a whisper. Hannibal is at the gates. Yet for Hannibal, time was running out. Without reinforcements, without the full backing of Carthage, his victories could not translate into ultimate triumph. Across the sea, Rome began striking at Carthaginian holdings, in Sicily, in Sardinia, and eventually in Spain. Hannibal, undefeated, was nonetheless being outflanked. For more than a decade, Hannibal remained in Italy, undefeated yet unfulfilled. His presence haunted Rome, but his hopes of breaking the Republic faded with each passing year. Though he had shattered Roman armies in battle, the city itself proved unbreakable. Rome's alliances, though strained, held firm. The Senate's will did not falter. Hannibal's genius could bring victories, but it could not topple the foundations of Rome's stubborn endurance. Meanwhile, the tides of war shifted elsewhere. In Spain, the sons of Hamilcar, Hasdrubal and Mago, carried on the fight against Rome. Yet there arose a Roman commander who would change the balance of power. Publius Cornelius Scipio. Still young when he first took command, Scipio possessed a vision and daring that matched Hannibal himself. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he drove Carthaginian forces from Iberia, capturing their cities and severing their vital silver supply. By 206 before Common Era, Spain was lost to Carthage. Scipio's gaze then turned toward Africa. He understood that to defeat Carthage, one must strike at its heart, forcing Hannibal to abandon Italy. Rome, wary yet desperate, entrusted him with this audacious plan. With legions hardened by victory in Spain, Scipio crossed into North Africa, bringing the war to Carthage's doorstep. Carthage, alarmed, called upon allies for aid. The Numidians, masters of cavalry, were divided in their loyalties. At first, Carthage had enjoyed the support of King Syphax, but Scipio, ever the diplomat as well as the general, forged an alliance with another Numidian prince, Massinissa. This decision would prove decisive, for in the flat plains of Africa, cavalry was the key to victory, and Massinissa's horsemen gave Rome the edge. As Scipio advanced, Carthage grew desperate. The Senate, cautious and divided, could no longer ignore the threat, and so they summoned their greatest general home. Hannibal Barca, after nearly 16 years in Italy, received the order to return. One can imagine his feelings. For half his life, Hannibal had fought Rome on its own soil, undefeated in the field. Yet now, he was forced to leave behind the land where he had written his legend. With heavy heart, he sailed back across the Mediterranean to the city of his birth, knowing that the final reckoning had come. In 202 before Common Era, near the town of Zama, the two greatest generals of their age stood face to face. Hannibal, seasoned and wise, led an army of veterans, supported by war elephants and Carthaginian levies. Scipio, younger but bold, commanded disciplined Roman legions, bolstered by Numidian cavalry. Part 2. The battle began with the elephants. Hannibal unleashed them in a thunderous charge, hoping to shatter Rome's lines. But Scipio had prepared for this. Trumpets blared, frightening the beasts, while Roman soldiers opened lanes through their ranks, letting the elephants pass harmlessly by. Some turned back, trampling their own men. The shock Hannibal hoped for never came. Next came the clash of infantry. Hannibal's veterans fought with unmatched skill, pressing the Romans hard. The battle raged, dust and cries filling the African air. For a moment, it seemed as though the balance might tilt toward Carthage. But then came the decisive stroke. Massinissa's cavalry, along with Scipio's, overwhelmed Hannibal's horsemen and swept around to strike his infantry from behind. Surrounded, pressed on all sides, the Carthaginian army broke. Hannibal, ever composed, managed to escape the slaughter, but his army was destroyed. Carthage had been defeated. The terms Rome imposed were harsh. Carthage was stripped of its empire, forbidden to wage war without Rome's consent, and burdened with heavy tribute. The dream of Carthaginian supremacy was over. Hannibal, though respected even by his enemies, returned to the city in disgrace, his oath fulfilled in spirit, but broken in reality. Yet Hannibal did not fade quietly. As a statesman, he reformed Carthage's finances and governance, restoring stability. But Rome, fearful of his influence, demanded his surrender. To avoid capture, Hannibal fled into exile, offering his skills to other kings, always seeking new ways to strike at Rome. For years he wandered, to the courts of the Seleucid kings, to Bithynia in Asia Minor. Even there, Rome's shadow followed. Hunted to the end, Hannibal chose death by poison rather than fall into Roman hands. His final act was one of defiance. He denied Rome the satisfaction of parading him as a captive. With Hannibal's death, a chapter closed, yet his memory lingered. To Rome, he was their darkest nightmare, the man who had brought them closer to destruction than any enemy before or since. To Carthage, he was their greatest son, a symbol of courage and resistance. And to history, he remains a figure of fascination, a general whose brilliance defied the might of Rome, even if fate denied him victory. But though the Second Punic War had ended, Carthage still stood, a shadow of its former self, yes, but still alive, still trading, still dreaming. Rome, however, was not finished. A reckoning yet remained. After Zama, Carthage lived on, but in chains. The once proud empire was reduced to a city-state, stripped of its fleets, its territories, and its right to wage war without Roman permission. Year by year, the indemnities drained its wealth. Yet even in defeat, Carthage proved resilient. Its merchants still sailed the Mediterranean. Its fields still yielded abundant grain, and its craftsmen still plied their trade. Slowly, the city began to recover, rebuilding prosperity, despite its subjugation. But prosperity itself became dangerous. For Rome, Carthage was no longer a rival in arms, but a rival in commerce. Roman farmers complained that cheap Carthaginian grain undercut their markets. Roman merchants resented the revival of Punic trade, and Roman politicians, ever eager to stoke fear, warned that the old enemy might rise again. Among these voices, one grew loudest of all, Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Elder. Stern, uncompromising, and unyielding, Cato ended every speech in the Senate with the same words, no matter the topic: Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. His cry became a mantra, feeding Rome's suspicion and hatred. Meanwhile, in Carthage itself, the shadow of Hannibal lingered. Though he had fled into exile, his reforms had strengthened the city, paying off debts ahead of schedule and curbing corruption. But his brilliance also made him an eternal target of Roman fear. Even abroad, he continued to inspire dread. When he advised Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire in his war against Rome, Roman senators trembled at the thought of facing him again. When Antiochus fell, Hannibal moved on, a wanderer in the courts of kings. Yet Rome's agents hunted him relentlessly. Finally cornered in Bithynia, he chose poison over capture. His last words, it is said, mocked Rome, that they could not wait for the death of a tired old man. With Hannibal gone, Carthage had lost its greatest son, but the city still endured. For decades, it coexisted uneasily under Rome's watchful eye. But in the mid-2nd century before Common Era, a conflict with its neighbor, Numidia, brought matters to a head. Massinissa, Rome's loyal ally, pushed into Carthaginian territory again and again, seizing land, testing limits. Carthage, bound by treaty, appealed to Rome for protection. Rome ignored their pleas. At last, unable to endure further humiliation, Carthage raised arms against Numidia, violating the terms of peace. This gave Rome the excuse it had long sought. War was declared. The Third Punic War had begun. Unlike the grand struggles of the past, this war was one-sided. Carthage was strong enough to resist, but too weak to prevail. Rome sent its armies, led by Scipio Aemilianus, grandson by adoption of the great Scipio Africanus. The city prepared for siege, fortifying its walls, forging weapons day and night, calling its people to arms. Every man, woman, and child labored for survival. The siege dragged on for 3 years. Carthage fought with the desperation of a cornered lion. Assaults were repelled, engines destroyed, Roman soldiers beaten back. The defenders built new weapons from the very timbers of their houses, melted gold and silver to buy supplies, and turned every street into a barricade. Hunger gnawed at them, but still they fought. At last, in 146 before Common Era, Scipio launched the final assault. Roman legions stormed the walls, street by street, house by house, as Carthaginians resisted to the end. Flames consumed the city. Smoke blackened the sky. The cries of battle and despair echoed through the once proud harbor. For 6 days, the slaughter continued. Carthage, once mistress of the seas, was reduced to ruin. When the fires at last died down, the city lay in ashes. 50,000 survivors, the last remnant of a people who had defied Rome for centuries, were sold into slavery. The city itself was leveled, its harbor destroyed, its fields cursed, or so the Romans claimed, with salt to ensure nothing would grow. Carthage was no more. Scipio Aemilianus, standing amid the smoking ruins, is said to have wept. Though he had fulfilled Rome's will, though he had destroyed Rome's rival, he looked upon the devastation and thought of Troy, of Nineveh, of Babylon, of all the great cities that had fallen, and of the truth that Rome itself, one day, would share the same fate. Thus ended Carthage, Rome's greatest rival, not with a treaty, not with survival in shadow, but with annihilation. Its name would linger only as a memory, a warning, and a whisper in the pages of history. Yet even in destruction, Carthage did not vanish entirely. Centuries later, the Romans themselves would rebuild the site, raising a new city upon the ruins, a Roman Carthage. It would thrive again, ironically, as part of the very empire that had once sworn to erase it. Christianity would later find fertile ground there, producing saints and scholars, ensuring that Carthage's soil would never be forgotten. Still, its story endures. In every study of strategy, Hannibal's name shines. In every tale of rivalry, Rome and Carthage stand together, twin giants locked in struggle. And in every reflection on the rise and fall of civilizations, the flames of Carthage remind us that no power, however mighty, is eternal. Carthage, queen of the seas, rival of Rome, lost but never forgotten. Still, its story endures. In every study of strategy, Hannibal's name shines. In every tale of rivalry, Rome and Carthage stand together, twin giants locked in struggle. And in every reflection on the rise and fall of civilizations, the flames of Carthage remind us that no power, however mighty, is eternal. Carthage, queen of the seas, rival of Rome, lost but never forgotten. The ruins of Carthage still rest on the shores of modern Tunisia. Stones weathered by centuries, foundations swallowed by earth, fragments of walls and harbors now silent. Yet in those ruins lies a story larger than the city itself. The story of human ambition, of rivalry, of resilience, and of loss. Carthage was born of wanderers, built by merchants, defended by generals, and remembered by enemies. Its legacy stretches far beyond its fall. The Punic Wars reshaped the Mediterranean, transforming Rome into an empire. Hannibal's daring marches continue to be studied by military minds. The very struggles of Carthage gave rise to the Rome we know from history, an empire that carried its own contradictions, triumphs, and tragedies. But there is something deeper, too. Carthage is a reminder that history is not written only by victors. Though Rome survived and Carthage perished, the Punic spirit endures in the echoes of its language, in the remnants of its art, and in the fascination it continues to inspire. The rivalry between Carthage and Rome is not only a tale of war, it is a tale of human will, of courage against impossible odds, of civilizations colliding on the stage of destiny. And perhaps that is why, even 2,000 years later, we cannot let Carthage go. Its rise and fall speaks to us because it mirrors our own world, ambition and fear, wealth and struggle, creation and destruction. To walk among its ruins is to hear whispers of ships setting sail, of merchants bargaining in crowded markets, of soldiers swearing oaths of loyalty, of a child named Hannibal promising eternal enmity. Carthage may have burned, but in memory it burns still, not in destruction, but in remembrance. Rome's greatest rival, immortal in defeat. If you've journeyed with me through this long night of history, I thank you for keeping the story alive. And if you'd like to continue exploring the forgotten civilizations, lost peoples, and epic struggles of the past, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you never miss what's coming next.